I'm Samantha Foster, and this is Venus Mastermind, a space for honest reflection, pattern breaking, and sovereign thinking. I'm not here to perform or to teach in a formal way. This is a shared reflection, a place to think out loud, to name what's been living in me, and to speak honestly about what I'm seeing and integrating. There's no agenda here beyond truth and presence. If something here resonates, take what's yours and leave the rest. Welcome back. Today we step into level 4 of the self-led path, Archetype Mastery. And before we go anywhere, I want to sit with what this level actually is, because I think a lot of us have been carrying a quiet confusion for a long time without ever having language for it. We do the healing work, we start to feel different inside, we stop reacting the way we used to. And then somewhere along the way, we notice that part of us that used to be front and center have moved to the background, while other parts we barely recognized before are now running the show. And we don't always know what to make of that. We can start to wonder, am I becoming someone new? Did I lose the version of me I used to be? Or is something else happening here, something quieter and more true? This level is about that something else. It's about understanding that we don't actually trade in one identity for another as we move through life. We carry multiple ways of being, multiple archetypes, multiple patterns of how we show up, and different ones naturally step into the front seat depending on the season we're in. The work isn't about discovering a brand new self. It's about learning to recognize which part of us is most alive right now, and then choosing how we want to express it. That's the piece most of us were never given. We were never taught how to work with these shifts consciously. So when one part of us steps forward and another moves back, it can feel confusing or like a loss, or like we're supposed to be further along than we are. This level is about bringing some clarity and some kindness to that process. And the question I keep coming back to with this work, the one that lives underneath this whole level, is one we may have been circling for a long time without ever putting it into words. Who am I being right now? And is this expression of me actually supporting the life I want to live? What I've been sitting with is how often the exhaustion we feel comes from still fighting the terrain we've been given. The mirror principle shows us this. When we're still resisting the season we're in or the expression that's currently active, life tends to keep reflecting that resistance back to us. And yet, when the grasping relaxes, and when we stop forcing and instead begin to understand the terrain, something often shifts, not because the circumstances suddenly changed, but because we stopped arguing with them. That's the law of reversal showing up in real life. So let's start with something most of us have felt, but maybe never named.
The shifting nature of who we are.
If we look back across our own lives, most of us can see that we've moved through different versions of ourselves, not in a superficial way, not like changing styles or interests, but in a deeper way. The part of us that was so front and center in our 20s might be much quieter now. The part of us that was running everything in our 30s might have stepped back. And something we barely had language for 10 years ago might be the very thing carrying us through this current season. Most of us interpret these shifts in one of two ways. Either we think something is wrong with us, that we've lost our way, or we're not as consistent as we should be, or we think we're supposed to be becoming someone entirely new. Like there's this true final version of ourselves we're supposed to eventually arrive at, and everything before that was just practice. But what I've come to see is different. We don't become different people. We have different parts of us, different archetypes, different ways of moving through the world, and life has a way of bringing different ones forward at different times. The part that was leading in one season doesn't disappear when another one steps in. It just moves into a supporting role. And the part that's leading now was probably always there, even if it was in the background. This isn't about becoming someone new. It's about learning to recognize which part of us is on stage right now, and then choosing how we want to express it. And this is where I want to bring in something that has been genuinely helpful for me in understanding these shifts.
The timing of these shifts.
One of the things I've noticed both in my life and in the lives of people I work with is that these movements between different parts of us often have a timing to them. They're not completely random. There are seasons where one way of being feels natural and alive, and other seasons where that same way of being starts to feel heavy or misaligned. And when we don't have any way of understanding that timing, it's easy to think we're doing something wrong. For me, one of the clearest ways I've been able to track and make sense of these shifts is through Vedic astrology. I know this is the first time that I have mentioned astrology. I use it in a very specific way and just as one of my tools in coaching and in my own life and in my children's life. So it's not something separate from my life, but as a way of seeing which energies are most alive in us at any given time. It's not about predicting the future or labeling ourselves with fixed traits. It's simply a language for noticing the timing of things, for seeing that certain parts of us are being asked to step forward right now, while others are being asked to recede or to take on a different role. I don't share this to teach astrology. I share it because it's been one of the most practical tools I've found for understanding why certain parts of me have felt so alive in some seasons and so heavy in others. And I've seen it help other people in the same way, not as a belief system they have to adopt, but as a mirror they can look into when they're trying to make sense of their own shifts. And once we start paying attention to these shifts, something becomes very clear.
We don't change archetypes, we refine their expression.
This is the piece I want to sit with most in this episode because I think it changes how we hold ourselves through these transitions. We don't actually trade in one archetype for another. The parts of us that have always been there don't go away. What changed is how we express them, and that expression can move between a lower, more distorted form and a higher, more integrated form, otherwise known as being healthy. All of this within the same lifetime, sometimes within the same year. Let me give you a real example because I think it shows what this actually looks like when it's not theoretical. There was a season where a particular part of me, a part that knows how to build, how to tend, how to grow something slowly with care, and it was expressing itself through overwork, through stress, through trying to be everything for everyone, through pushing and forcing and caring far more than my body could actually hold. That was still the same energy. It was still the cultivator in me. It just wasn't expressing itself in a way that supported life. It was expressing itself in a way that eventually broke me down. And that breakdown wasn't random. My body had been speaking for years through exhaustion, through tension, through symptoms I kept explaining away. But I was still living inside the old expression. I was still treating that energy like it had to be performed through constant output and over responsibility. And eventually, my body drew a hard line. I had a stroke. Not from high cholesterol or high blood pressure. I didn't have either of those. It came from years of stress and a nervous system that had been in survival mode far longer than I was willing to admit. That moment forced a reckoning. The same archetype that had been running me into the ground was still there after the stroke. It didn't disappear, but it was now being asked to express itself inside a body with real limitations. I had a choice. I could stay in the lower expression, the one that said, I have to keep pushing anyway, or this is just how I am, and likely keep harming myself. Or I could let that old form complete its job and allow the same energy to move through me in a different way, slower, more deliberate, with actual respect from the capacity that was left, with less forcing and more tending. That shift came with real grief, by the way. I had to feel the loss of the version of myself that thought she could do it all. The one who believed pushing through was strength. The one who had built so much of her identity around being the one who could handle anything. That grief was honest. I had to sit with it for weeks. It still moves through sometimes, but on the other side of it has been something quieter and more true. The same cultivator energy, now learning to build something that doesn't require me to break in order to grow. What I've been realizing is that the archetype didn't change. The terrain was the same. What changed was how I related to it. Going back to Vedic astrology, and this is just an example of how I use astrology charts. I have Saturn in Rohini. Rohini carries the energy of building, the cultivator, and nourishing growth, the kind of place where things can be cultivated with care over time. But when Saturn is there, the terrain has real limitation. It asks for slow, steady, long-term building, and this is a very specific archetype. It doesn't give quick or easy results. For a long time, I fought that. I wanted the version of Rohini that feels more bountiful and immediate. But the mirror kept showing me that the limitation itself was part of the work. The question wasn't, why wasn't I given easier land? It became, what can actually be built here? What is the highest expression possible with this terrain? At the time of the stroke, it wasn't just Saturn in Rohini doing the work. It was Ketu and Auslasia moving over my chart also. Auslasia carries a very intense, often hidden or serpentine kind of effort. A different archetype. The kind that can drive someone to keep pushing long after the body has said stop. That archetype was interacting with my Saturn in Rohini terrain and pushing it into overdrive, the overwork, the exhaustion, the nervous system collapse. That was Ketu in Auslasia expressing itself through the limitations of my Saturn in Rohini. The terrain didn't cause the stroke, and I want to make clear it wasn't the astrology or the placements of the planets that caused the stroke. It was because I was demonstrating an unhealthy relationship with that archetype instead of a healthy relationship. I've seen something similar with someone close to me whose Mercury is in Ardra. Ardra carries the energy of Rudra, the storm. It's intense and often disruptive. For him, that showed up very early as major challenges with communication. He used sign language as a child. He needed extensive speech therapy even now in his 20s. He still works with a speech therapist and a writing tutor who helps him line by line with his stories. It has not been easy. And yet, what I've seen is that the same storm energy that created the limitation is also what's forging the voice. He's not just writing stories. He's becoming someone who tells stories that come through real struggle. The archetype didn't change. The terrain didn't change, but the expression of it is shifting from the storm happening to him into the storm becoming the force that shapes his voice. This is what I mean when I say we don't change archetypes. We refine how we express them, and that refinement is some of the most important work we'll ever do. And this shows up in so many areas of life, not just the big dramatic ones.
Everyday examples of the same pattern.
We see this everywhere once we start looking. Someone who was deeply identified with being a mother when her children were young might find the same nurturing energy wanting to express itself differently once the kids leave home. It doesn't mean she stops being a mother. It means the expression of that part of her is being asked to take a new form. Maybe in community, maybe in creative work, maybe in mentoring others. Same energy, different shape. What I've noticed is that kind of shift often lines up with a change in dasha, meaning a change in which archetype is leading the season. The nurturing energy doesn't disappear. It just moves into a supporting role while another part of her steps into the lead. Or someone who spent years in a career that required them to be highly adaptable, highly attuned to other people's needs, might find that same sensitivity wanting to turn inward now, to listen to themselves with the same care they once gave everyone else. Again, not a new identity, just a different expression of something that was already there. Or someone who learned early that their worth came from being the responsible one, the one who held everything together. That same part of them can either keep expressing itself through over-responsibility and resentment, or it can learn to express itself through mature stewardship, through choosing what they actually want to carry and what they don't. Same archetype, different expression. The question isn't, who am I supposed to become now? The question is, how is this part of me being asked to show up in this season? And what would the highest expression of it look like? And this is where the real work of the Archetype Mastery begins.
The choice we get to make.
The lower expression of an archetype can be very unhealthy, and it's usually just an old pattern. It's the way we learned to use that energy when we didn't have other options. The survival form, the approval-seeking form, the one shaped by environments that didn't have room for us to express it in any other way. But we're not stuck with that form. Once we can see clearly which part of us is on stage and how it's currently expressing itself, we get to choose to ask whether this is the highest expression available to us right now, or whether there's another way this same energy can move through us that would serve our life better. And that choice is available in every season, even the ones that feel forced on us, even the ones that come with real limitations, real losses, real grief. That's where our power lives. And I want to name something honest here, because this work isn't always gentle.
The grief that comes with refining and expression.
When we start to see that a part of us has been expressing itself in a way that cost us, and when we begin to choose a different expression, there's often grief, sometimes a lot of it. We can grieve the version of ourselves that used to lead with that energy. We can grieve the identity we built around the old expression. We can grieve the relationships that were shaped by it. We can grieve the time we spent living from that form before we knew there was another way. That grief is real, and it deserves to be felt. It's not a sign that we're doing something wrong. It's a sign that something is shifting at a deep level. And on the other side of that grief, not instead of it, but alongside it, there's often a quiet kind of relief. The relief of no longer having to perform an expression that was never really sustainable for us. The relief of letting an old form complete its job and allowing something truer to take its place. Sometimes that relief comes simply from stopping the fight with the terrain we've been given. When we stop wasting energy wishing the archetype, the season, or the circumstances were different, something opens. The same land is still there, but we're no longer arguing with it. And from that place, cultivation becomes possible in a way it wasn't before. This is the work, not becoming someone new, but learning to express who we already are in ways that actually support the life we're trying to live.
How this becomes yours.
If something in this is resonating, you might be wondering how to actually work with it in your own life. One way is to look at your Vedic astrology chart and notice which nakshatras are active in your placements. Those can point to the specific archetypal energies moving through you, the ones that have been most alive in different seasons, and the ones that may still be expressing themselves in ways that no longer serve you. You don't need to become an expert. You just need to be willing to look and see what shows up. Another way is simpler. You can simply reflect on your own life. Where have you felt the strongest pull or the heaviest resistance? What parts of you have felt most alive in certain seasons and then quietly receded in others? What patterns keep repeating even when you've tried to change them? Those are often the archetypes asking to be seen and refined. And here's what I've come to believe is the real gift of this work. When we stop fighting our terrain and start honoring it, when we stop wishing we had someone else's chart or someone else's gifts, someone else's life, something powerful begins to happen. We start to feel a sense of freedom, not the loud, dramatic kind, but a quiet, grounded kind. The kind that comes from finally stopping the war with who we actually are. I felt this with my own Saturn in Rohini, that slow, limited terrain I talked about earlier. For a long time, I kept wishing I'd been given more fertile ground. But once I stopped trying to grow what doesn't belong there and started asking what can grow here, I stopped feeling like life was happening to me and began to feel like I was actually living my life. I'm feeling this even more right now as I step in front of the camera for the first time since the stroke. For months, I kept telling myself I would wait until I was thinner, fitter, healthier, more vibrant, until I looked more like the version of myself I used to be. But that version no longer exists, not in the same way. I have real limitations now. I have tremors, I'm carrying extra weight, I'm still in physical therapy, and I finally had to make a decision. I could keep waiting until some future version of me was ready, or I could step in front of the camera as I am right now, with the body I have, the nervous system I have, and the identity I'm currently living. There has been grief in that choice. Grief for the loss of the healthy, energetic, I can do anything version of myself. But there also has been a quiet relief in finally stopping the fight with the terrain I actually have. That's the freedom I'm talking about. When we fully embrace our own archetypes and choose to express them at their highest level, we stop apologizing for who we are. We stop trying to perform someone else's version of success or ease, and we begin to feel the ground under our feet again. We know who we are. We know what we're working with. And from that place, more opportunities become visible, not because the terrain suddenly changed, but because we finally stopped wasting energy fighting it. This is the beginning of stepping into sovereignty, not because we forced our way into a different life, but because we choose to fully inhabit the one we actually have.
Where we land.
If something in this is landing, if you're noticing parts of yourself that have shifted over the years, or parts that are shifting right now, I want to offer you a few gentle questions, not to answer, just to sit with. Which part of me feels most alive in this season of my life? How is that part currently expressing itself? And does it support the life I actually want? What would a higher expression of this same energy look like? And what grief, if any, comes with letting the old expression go? There's no rush to figure any of this out. There's no right answer. There's only the honest noticing. Because once we can see which archetype is on stage, and once we can see how it's expressing itself, we get to choose. We get to refine. We get to bring more consciousness to something that used to run us from underneath. That's the mastery, not controlling which archetype shows up, but learning to work with it consciously once it does. And this is the doorway into the next layer of the path.
What's coming next?
Once we start to understand the archetypes moving through us, and once we begin to choose higher expressions of them, something opens up. We stop fighting ourselves so much. We stop thinking we have to become someone we're not. And we start to have more energy available for actually living. That's where we're headed next. And the integration of all of this into what it looks like to live from a place where the inner work and the outer life are no longer at war with each other. It's sovereign consciousness. But we don't have to rush there. This level, Archetype Mastery, is its own deep work, and it deserves its own time. That's enough for today. And I want to leave us somewhere quiet before we close. If you're noticing that certain parts of you have been carrying more weight than they need to, or that certain old expressions are ready to be refined, let that noticing be enough for now. You don't have to change anything today. You don't have to name anything perfectly. You just need to be willing to see what's actually moving through you right now, and to ask yourself with kindness whether the current expression is still serving the life you want to live. That willingness is the beginning of the mastery, and it's available to all of us no matter where we are in our lives. I'm ready. I'm really glad we're here together. I'll see us in the next one. I'm going to pause here and let this land. If something in this resonated, you don't need to do anything with it. Just sit with it and notice what continues to unfold. Thank you for listening and for being here with me.